I still remember the exact words because they never really left me. Move your SUV. A man is dying 20 feet behind you. The woman standing at the gate didn't even flinch. She folded her arms, smiled like she had already won, and answered, "Rules are rules." Looking back now, that wasn't the moment everything fell apart. It was just the moment everyone else finally caught up to what I'd been living with for nearly 2 years. My name is Ethan Harper, and I own the last property at the end of a private gravel lane outside a quiet subdivision called Willow Creek Estates. Most people assume I live inside the HOA because the only entrance passes through their decorative security gate. The truth is a little different. My property predates the neighborhood by decades, and when the developer built the subdivision, they recorded a permanent easement, giving me unrestricted access through that entrance. It was filed with the county, attached to my deed, and signed by every party involved. I know because I read every page before I signed anything. That's probably the compliance officer in me. I spent 11 years making sure companies followed regulations, and somewhere along the way, I developed the annoying habit of saving every receipt, every permit, every survey, and every legal document that ever crossed my desk. My wife used a joke that if civilization collapsed, I'd probably rebuild society from 3-ring binders and color-coded folders. Maybe she wasn't wrong. Things changed when a woman named Victoria Lang became president of the HOA. She wasn't the loudest person I'd ever met. Actually, she rarely raised her voice. That was almost worse. She spoke with this calm confidence that made every unreasonable demand sound like it had already been approved by Congress. Within weeks, she had invented new visitor rules, temporary access permits, delivery restrictions, landscaping inspections, and a dozen policies that somehow always seemed to inconvenience anyone who wasn't on the board. At first, I ignored it. Every few weeks, she'd stop a delivery truck for 10 minutes, asking questions she had no legal authority to ask. My Amazon packages became neighborhood entertainment. FedEx drivers learned to sigh before they reached the gate. One UPS driver laughed and asked if he needed a passport to deliver a toolbox. I laughed too because sometimes humor is easier than fighting. But underneath the jokes, I noticed something else. Victoria wasn't enforcing rules. She was testing limits. Every time nobody challenged her, the next rule became a little more ridiculous. I quietly kept records, screenshots of HOA emails, photos of notices, copies of county plats. My easement agreement stayed inside a waterproof folder behind my truck seat. I never expected to need it. Then one Tuesday afternoon, everything changed. It was warm, quiet, one of those lazy afternoons where nothing important is supposed to happen. A regional courier arrived with several equipment cases I had ordered for a restoration project. The driver looked exhausted when he stepped out of the van. We exchanged maybe 3 sentences before his face lost all color. He grabbed his chest, stumbled backward onto the gravel driveway, and collapsed so hard I heard his shoulder hit the ground. His breathing turned shallow. His lips started fading gray. I called 911 before I even reached him. The dispatcher stayed calm, asking questions while I tried to keep him awake. 9 minutes later, I heard the ambulance coming. I've never been happier to hear sirens in my life. Then, silence. The sirens stopped. I looked toward the entrance and immediately knew something was wrong. The ambulance wasn't moving. I sprinted down the lane until I reached the gate, and there she was. Victoria had parked her luxury SUV sideways across the only entrance wide enough for emergency vehicles. She was standing beside it, holding the gate remote like she owned the entire county. One paramedic leaned out the window yelling, "Ma'am, we need access immediately." Victoria shook her head without the slightest hint of panic. This vehicle doesn't have an approved temporary access permit. The paramedic blinked like he'd misheard her. "Someone is in cardiac arrest." She answered, then the homeowner should have followed HOA procedures. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I yelled, "Victoria, that's my easement. Move your SUV now." She looked directly at me, reached over, pressed the electronic lock on the gate, and I heard the metal latch click shut. Then she smiled. People like you always think the rules don't apply to them. I took one slow breath. Every instinct told me to drag her vehicle out of the way myself. Instead, I reached into my pocket, opened my phone camera, and started recording. She noticed immediately. "Are you filming me?" she asked. "Absolutely," I replied. "Good," she said. "Make me move." Those 3 words would end up costing her more than she could ever imagine. While she stood there guarding a locked gate, the paramedics abandoned the ambulance, climbed over the fence carrying medical bags, then lifted a stretcher over the railing by hand. For precious minutes disappeared before they reached the man lying unconscious on my driveway. For minutes that no one ever gets back. And as I stood there watching them fight to restart a stranger's heart, one thought kept repeating inside my head. This isn't an HOA dispute anymore. This is something far worse. If you want me to continue with part 2, just say the strange thing about adrenaline is that it disappears long before the consequences do. About 15 minutes after the ambulance finally pulled away with the driver inside, the neighborhood slowly returned to normal. Kids rode bicycles. Someone watered flowers across the street. A lawn mower started humming somewhere behind the clubhouse. If you had driven past the entrance an hour later, you would have thought nothing unusual had happened. But I couldn't stop replaying those 4 lost minutes in my head. I kept hearing Victoria's voice saying, "Make me move." It wasn't just what she said. It was how comfortable she felt saying it. Like she truly believed no one could ever question her authority. That confidence fascinated me more than it angered me. People don't usually gamble that boldly unless they've been winning for a long time. I drove home, sat at my kitchen table, opened my laptop, and started building a timeline. Years working in corporate compliance had taught me something simple. Emotion convinces almost nobody. Documentation convinces everyone. I downloaded the 911 dispatch record. I saved the timestamp from my phone. I copied security camera footage from the driveway. I requested the ambulance arrival log. I photographed tire marks where Victoria's SUV had blocked the entrance. Then I opened the county database and downloaded the original easement documents that had been recorded nearly 13 years earlier. Every page carried official recording numbers, survey maps, signatures, and legal descriptions that left absolutely no room for interpretation. The access lane wasn't HOA property. It wasn't community property. It wasn't subject to temporary permits or board approval. It was a recorded emergency access easement protected under county law. The following morning, I visited the sheriff's office carrying a binder almost 3 inches thick. Deputy Ryan Cole met me at the front desk. Halfway through watching the video, he paused it himself. "She locked the gate after the ambulance arrived?" he asked quietly. "You can hear the latch," I answered. He replayed the audio twice before nodding slowly. "Leave this with us." From there, I drove directly to the county fire marshal. Fire Marshal Denise Warren didn't say much while reviewing everything. She simply watched the footage once, wrote several notes, then asked one question. Did anyone from the HOA attempt to reopen the gate after they realized this was a medical emergency? No. She closed the binder. That answers everything I needed. For the first time since the incident, I felt strangely calm. I wasn't chasing revenge anymore. My job was finished. Now professionals would decide what happened next. Meanwhile, Victoria acted as though nothing had changed. 2 days later, another HOA email appeared reminding residents that all outside contractors were still required to obtain temporary access authorization before entering the neighborhood. She even added a paragraph about maintaining order during emergency situations. I actually laughed when I read it. She genuinely believed paperwork could erase what dozens of people had witnessed with their own eyes. But something else started happening behind the scenes. Several neighbors quietly knocked on my door. One elderly couple admitted Victoria had once delayed a home health nurse because the caregiver's vehicle wasn't listed on an approved visitor spreadsheet. Another resident described missing an important chemotherapy appointment after being questioned for almost 20 minutes at the entrance because his temporary windshield pass had expired overnight. A landscaping contractor showed me emails where Victoria threatened to blacklist his company unless he followed procedures that didn't exist anywhere in the governing documents. Each story by itself sounded frustrating. Together, they painted an entirely different picture. This wasn't one terrible decision. It was years of manufactured authority slowly convincing ordinary people to accept unreasonable behavior because arguing felt exhausting. I documented every conversation, not because gossip mattered, but because patterns always matter. 3 days after the ambulance incident, I received a phone call from the hospital. The driver had survived. They couldn't release medical details, but they confirmed he was awake and willing to speak with me. I wasn't sure what to expect when I walked into his hospital room. He looked tired, pale, connected to monitors, but very much alive. He smiled weakly when I introduced myself. "You stayed with me?" he asked. "Until the ambulance left." He nodded slowly. "Thank you." We talked for several minutes before I apologized for everything that had happened at the entrance. He listened carefully as I explained the blocked gate, the delay, the recording, and the investigation. He remained completely silent until I asked for his full name, so I could update my statement. "Daniel Mercer," he answered. I wrote it down. "Occupation." He smiled faintly. "Regional Operations Director, Hawthorne Community Management." My pen stopped moving. I looked up. Wait, Hawthorne manages Willow Creek Estates, among others. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Then I opened my tablet and played the recording. Daniel watched Victoria standing in front of her SUV with crossed arms. He heard the paramedic yell that a man was in cardiac arrest. He heard her refuse to move. He heard her lock the gate. Then he heard the words that echoed through the hospital room just as clearly as they had at the entrance. "Make me." Daniel closed the tablet himself. His face didn't show anger. Somehow that worried me even more. "She's the board president?" he finally asked. "Yes. Our company approves every quarterly contract that board submits." Another pause. "She knew who we were?" "No." He slowly leaned back against the hospital pillow. "Probably better that she didn't." Before I left, Daniel thanked me again for staying with him. I thought that would be the end of it. It wasn't even close. 6 days later, Hawthorne Community Management announced an emergency review of the entire Willow Creek HOA board. Their attorneys requested copies of every governing document, insurance policy, maintenance agreement, meeting minute, and legal expenditure from the previous 3 years. The fire marshal officially cited the obstruction of emergency responders. The sheriff's office opened a reckless endangerment investigation. The HOA's insurance carrier assigned outside counsel instead of using its normal claims department, which usually meant one thing. They expected exposure beyond standard policy coverage. Victoria finally called me that Friday evening. I almost didn't answer. When I did, her voice sounded completely different from the woman who had stood behind that locked gate. "Ethan, I think we've both misunderstood each other." I didn't respond. She continued talking anyway. Nobody knew how serious the situation was. I quietly opened the video on my phone. "Victoria," I interrupted, "would you like me to play the part where the paramedic says he's in cardiac arrest, or the part where you lock the gate afterward?" Silence. Long enough that I checked whether the call had disconnected. Finally, she whispered, "Can we meet?" "No, please. This is getting out of control." I looked through my front window toward the entrance where everything had started. "No," I said calmly. "This is finally under control." I hung up, but something still bothered me. Companies move fast when lawsuits appear. Government agencies move fast when emergency responders are obstructed. Yet Hawthorne had reacted almost instantly, almost personally. It felt like there was another piece of the puzzle I hadn't seen yet. 2 days later, while reviewing insurance disclosures that every homeowner had the legal right to inspect, I noticed an old liability claim from the previous year. Most of the file had been heavily summarized, but one page caught my attention. Near the approval section were 2 signatures. The first belonged to Victoria Lang. The second belonged to someone whose name I had never seen before, and somehow, deep down, I knew that unknown signature was about to explain everything. If you wanted to continue with part 3, just say, "I wish I could tell you the second signature belonged to some secret mastermind hiding behind the curtain." But real life is usually less dramatic and somehow even more disturbing. The name belonged to Leonard Briggs, Hawthorne Community Management's former regional compliance supervisor, a man who had quietly retired 8 months before everything happened at the gate. The insurance file showed that a homeowner had previously filed a complaint after emergency access had been delayed by one of Victoria's unauthorized gate procedures. Instead of correcting the policy, someone had signed off on a settlement, closed the claim, and buried the recommendation that emergency vehicles should always receive unrestricted access. Leonard's signature approved the internal review. Victoria's signature acknowledged the recommendation. Neither of them implemented it. That meant the danger wasn't hypothetical. Someone had already warned them exactly what could happen. They simply chose convenience over responsibility. Once the investigators found that document, everything accelerated. The sheriff's office expanded its case beyond the events of that Tuesday afternoon. The fire marshal requested historical board records. Hawthorne's legal department terminated its management agreement with the entire board before the end of the week, explaining that trust between the company and its client had become impossible to maintain. Victoria resigned before the special meeting could even begin, although everyone in the neighborhood understood resignation was simply a cleaner word than removal. Civil attorneys representing Daniel filed their notice of claim shortly afterward, and because the evidence included dispatch logs, video recordings, medical reports, witness statements, and a prior insurance file, nobody spent much time arguing about what had happened. The only real debate became how expensive those 4 lost minutes would ultimately prove to be. I saw Victoria only one more time. She was standing outside the clubhouse, carrying a cardboard box filled with framed certificates, board binders, and a little wooden nameplate that had once sat proudly in front of her seat during every monthly meeting. She looked older than I remembered, not because much time had passed, but because certainty had disappeared from her face. She noticed me walking toward the gate and hesitated before speaking. "I never thought it would go this far," she said quietly. I looked at the same entrance where paramedics had climbed a fence because someone believed paperwork mattered more than a heartbeat. Neither did the man lying on my driveway. I answered. She lowered her eyes. For the first time since I had known her, she had nothing left to say. A month later, the county approved a recorded amendment requiring that every emergency vehicle, law enforcement unit, ambulance, and fire apparatus receive immediate unrestricted access through the entrance without authorization, approval, permits, or HOA involvement of any kind. The gate system was reprogrammed. Emergency responders received universal access credentials. The amendment was permanently attached to the property's recorded documents, and my name appeared as the homeowner who requested the change. I never considered that a victory. Victories are supposed to feel good. This one simply felt necessary. Daniel eventually recovered well enough to return to work, and before he left rehabilitation, he mailed me a handwritten note. It wasn't long. It simply said, "You didn't save my life alone. You refused to let the truth disappear after everyone else went home." I still keep that note inside the same binder that holds my easement paperwork because, strangely enough, they belong together. One proves I had the legal right to use that road. The other reminds me why that right mattered in the first place. Every time I drive through that gate now, it opens before I even reach it. No dilas, no permits, no questions. Just a road doing exactly what it was always supposed to do. But every now and then, I wonder how many people have been quietly pushed around before someone finally said enough, and how many disasters begin with ordinary people convincing themselves that it's just a rule. So now I'd like to ask you something. Was Victoria simply enforcing policies she misunderstood, or did she cross a line the moment she placed authority above human life? And what do you think about the discovery that another official had already been warned about the same danger long before this happened? Let me know your thoughts in the comments, because I genuinely like to hear where you think responsibility begins and where it should never be forgiven.